Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew, and tonight I'd like to welcome 32nd degree Freemason, philosopher, historian, also a lawyer. He's the author of several books such as Symbolism, a guide to esoteric imagery in popular movies, and Symbolism 2, Robert Sullivan. How you doing tonight, Robert?
Hey, Chris. Thank you for having me on Forbidden.
Oh, Robert, you froze up there.
Okay.
Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time. And as usual, let's start. You have a very fascinating background. Let's start there. Can you just give us a little bit about your background? What brought you to Freemasonry and what brought you to write your books?
Well, right. I had always been interested in Freemasonry. I come from a long line of Maryland Masons. And as a kid growing up, I was interested in cryptozoology, ghosts, the supernatural, UFOs, the normal, run the gamut of the supernatural, as it were. And I'd always wanted to join Freemasonry. It skipped over my father, but my grandfather, great-grandfathers were all Freemasons. Some of them actually were past masters. That's the title given to a Mason who has run his lodge as a worshipful master for a year. And it all just got started for me, really. It's something I always wanted to do. I spent my junior year abroad in 1992-93 at Oxford University at St. Catherine's College. And it was there that I really got introduced to what I would describe as the influence of the Hermetic tradition, the occult Hermetic tradition on popular culture, on material culture, on politics, on history, reading the books by people like Peter French, Manly P. Hall, Albert Pike, Francis Yates. That really interested me. And I just started doing research, independent writing, almost as a side project. And it continued. I just didn't stop. I kept doing it. Of course, I had a life to live also. And when I got out of college, I graduated Gettysburg in 1995. I technically should have graduated in 94, but I took a year off to work in Washington, D.C. But at any rate, after I graduated and before I went to law school, this was 96. This was the summer of 96. I was out to dinner with my mother and my father and a mutual friend of theirs who was a Freemason. And I asked him, he had the ring on, and I asked him point blank, I said, "Oh, I see you're a Mason." He said, "Yeah, I've been involved with the lodge for, 20, 30 plus years. I said, "Well, I want to join." And I've always heard the term, to be one, ask one. I said, "So I guess I'm asking you right now if I can join." And he said, "Yeah, absolutely." He said, "Let me get the ball rolling. I'll get you a petition in the mail." He said, "It moves somewhat slow. Remember, this is 96, so this is pre-internet. This is pre-social media, where everything now moves at lightning speed with email. This was, still we had to do things. Wanted to mail something to somebody, you put a stamp on it and dropped it in the mailbox."
Right.
I got the petition, filled it out, sent the check in. In October of 96, I went to the committee meeting. They form a committee in the lodge, to make sure, you're okay. You're not, completely crazy or something.
Right.
And yeah, they voted on me, and I went up in January of 97 to take the first degree, and I did the degree work in 97. In September of 97, I was raised to Master Mason, and then 2 years later, I did the Scottish Rite, one of the high degree bodies here in the United States. Became a 32nd, and again, as I was doing this, I was just writing, researching. I went to law school. I graduated that in 2000, and it was around the mid 2000s that this really started to come to a head, where I was still writing and I began putting my research online. The site back then to use was MySpace, Facebook, Twitter. That didn't exist. I just literally, Chris, began posting blogs, photo galleries, just to kind of gauge a reaction to it. And it was just met with overwhelming positive reviews, and people loved it. I got loads of comments on it. And a friend of mine who was a Freemason, who lived out of state, saw it and said, "This is really good work you're doing. Why don't you do a book about it?" And they kind of, like you see in a cartoon where the light bulb goes off over the character's head. It's something I had planned on anyway, so I just really, at that point, committed to writing it. And my first book, The Royal Arch of Enoch, was published in 2012. It was republished by me in 2016. And as you said at the intro, I've written 2 other books regarding movie symbolism, and I also have a work of fiction out. So that's kind of a brief background on me.
Very good. Now, I'm sure many of my subscribers, and I'm sure you get this a lot, have a very negative connotation of Freemasonry overall. They think it's all evil and used for negativity. What would you say to that?
Oh, I would say that's not the case at all. Freemasonry, I mean, I've been involved with the lodge for 20 plus years now. I've never seen anything in there that I would describe as evil in any way, shape, or form. It gets a lot of negative connotation. It comes from something that happened in the 1820s called the William Morgan Affair. That was really the hallmarker of the beginning of anti-Masonry in the United States. I mean, it does incorporate into its degrees, into its rituals, into its philosophies, many traditions. You have obvious, with the Abrahamic faiths, with Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, but you also have lots of incorporation of mystical, esoteric elements, Kabbalah, mysticism, Sufism, astrology, astrotheology, remnants of the mystery schools, Knight Templars. So it does incorporate a lot of these ancient traditions into its rituals, into its teachings. I mean, I guess you could say, some people see it, they don't like it because it doesn't embrace any one religion. It's deistic. You can believe in, as long as you believe in a supreme being, you can join. Atheists and agnostics are not allowed to join. But this does rub some people the wrong way, because in the rituals, especially in the meetings and the invocation, the God is invoked as the great architect of the universe. It's just a generic name given to the supreme being, but there's no mention of like Allah, Jesus Christ, Moses. It's kept deistic, so that can rub some people the wrong way. But it is influential. I mean, it has impacted society, certainly in the context of the United States. I mean, I have a chapter in my book titled "The United States of Freemasonry," where I argue this country is the world's first ever Masonic republic. So it does raise suspicion. I understand the negativity towards it. I don't subscribe to it, but I do understand where some of the paranoia comes from. I mean, there is a lot of Masonic symbolism in the world, and it can look somewhat suspicious, especially to the untrained eye. I can't refute that.
Now, would you agree that there are some secret societies and maybe some globalists that are using aspects of Freemasonry towards a negative, goal?
Well, I would say that anything can be used positively or negatively. I mean, there have been many Freemasons who have been controversial. That's pretty irrefutable as well. I mean, people always like to turn to Aleister Crowley, people like that. But I mean, J. Edgar Hoover was a very influential, high-degree Freemason who founded the FBI. And let's be brutally honest, I mean, his stance on civil rights is suspect at best. So, I mean, there are controversial people involved in Freemasonry. But it's like anything in the world, anything else. I mean, think something can be used positively or negatively. I've never, I mean, my involvement with Freemasonry, I mean, I do see community involvement. I do see impact on society. I do see, influence. I mean, I guess you could craft the argument, certainly, that, there are globalists out there trying to social engineer society. Perhaps they do tap into the reservoir symbolism of Freemasonry. That's certainly possible. I mean, you certainly had groups, like the Illuminati of Bavaria, I mean, who were real. And I mean, their influence, even on the United States, is definitely palpable. So, I mean, it's like anything else in the world. Everything casts a shadow. So my involvement with Freemasonry has been nothing but positive, but it does have a controversial side to it, just like everything else.
Now, you had mentioned that basically our country was founded on Freemasonry. Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's start there.
Okay.
And, also talk a little about how Washington was built basically on sacred geometry as well.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely correct. From the get-go, the United States is what I call a Masonic Republic. Many of the founders, when I say that, I'm really referring to people like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin. A lot of the signers of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, were Freemasons. What they ultimately decided to do was, they knew they didn't want a monarchy. They knew they didn't want a Vatican-styled organization. So they decided to craft a government around a society that many of them belonged to, that promoted democracy, egalitarianism, embrace morality. You had to believe in a supreme being to join it. So this appealed to them. So they thought, well, we're founding this new country. Freemasonry officially comes onto the history map at 1717. Granted, I know that it predates that in some form or fashion, but the reason I say that is in 1721, a Presbyterian minister named Dr. James Anderson publishes the Constitutions of the Freemasons. I mean, and this almost serves as like the working model for the United States Constitution. I mean, for example, I mean, in that you have the whole, the nutshell of separation of church and state comes out of the constitutions of Freemasonry. The triple division of government between a chief executive, legislature, and judiciary branch comes out of Blue Lodge Freemasonry, with the triple division of the Blue Lodge between a worshipful master and two wardens, a senior and a junior. So that comes out of the Masonic Lodge. So from the get-go, you're looking at a very deep, influential Masonic impact, you know, not only in the documents and the government system, but, you know, then you get into what you mentioned, like things like the sacred geometry. I mean, after all, Masonry is building, you know, it's civil engineering, it's architecture, it's geometry, it's mathematics. The original Masons were what you call your operative Masons. These are the guys who actually were doing the city planning, the architecture, things like that. So when you get into the template of places like Washington, D.C., I mean, the whole thing is, you know, correctly, you're absolutely right, based on Masonic emblems, Masonic symbolism. You have a lot of references to the sun. The sun is probably the most important symbol within Freemasonry. I mean, you have the right there in the heart of Washington, you have the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. This is also known as the 47th proposition of Euclid. This is the emblem of a worshipful master and denotes Masonic rulership. This is formed right there in the heart of Washington, D.C., between the White House, the Washington Monument obelisk, up the National Mall to the United States Capitol, and then the hypotenuse would be c squared. That would be Pennsylvania Avenue. So you have this Masonic solar emblem right there in the heart of Washington. And it's solar because it's the emblem of the worshipful master. He sits in the east representing a rising sun. So, I mean, I'm just giving you, you know, one example of it. I mean, you have the United States Capitol building with the dome. The dome is a chamber of the sun god Apollo. You have a lot of the Hermetic maxims, the as above, so below. I mean, for example, you have the cornerstone dropping of the United States Supreme Court building on October 13th. The sun is in the house of Libra, aligning the Supreme Court with the astrological scales of justice in the sky. So you have a lot of that going on in Washington, D.C. When you research it, and this, again, this is really the thesis of the Royal Arch of Enoch book, you'll not only find these, you know, Masonic esoteric templates in Washington, but you'll find them, you know, literally all over the place. And you'll find them here in Baltimore, Maryland, where I am. I mean, you'll find them on the emblems and logos of many of the state seals in colleges and universities. So it's a real deep study as to see, you know, how deep the rabbit hole goes. And when you become aware of the symbol and its context and how it's used, I mean, a lot of this will open up to you and say, oh, okay, now I understand why that's sitting here and that monument's there and this is sitting like that. You know, that was one of my motivational factors in writing the book, was to kind of explain this architectural occultism, as it were.
And you see as well a lot of Egyptian and Babylonian imagery as well.
Correct. Right. The Masonic Lodge draws on a lot of mystery school teachings. And you're absolutely correct. I mean, Babylonian, Egyptian, I mean, the entire third degree ritual, you know, where the candidate portrays Hiram Abiff is killed and resurrected. I mean, clearly you will see fingerprints of Christianity with the Christ story, you know, of death and resurrection. But of course, this is being lifted from the Osirian mysteries of Egypt, where Osiris, the Egyptian sun god, is killed and resurrected. Then he's replaced by Horus, his stand-in, and Osiris goes off to become sort of like a solar god of the dead. And then you have reference to Isis, his wife, virgin consort. I mean, you have astrological symbolism. I mean, Hiram Abiff is killed. You know, he's resurrected by the strong grip of the lion's paw. Again, this is a solar reference to Leo, lion's paw. Think Leo, soul house of the sun. 12 fellow craft go looking for the dead body. 12 houses of the zodiac. 12 apostles in Christianity. The candidate is concealed. The grave is concealed with a sprig of acacia. That's a flower that grew along the Nile, was sacred to the sun god Apollo. The Babylonian influence, absolutely. You get into that with the high degrees, with the construction in the Blue Lodge. You're dealing with the building of Solomon's temple. In the high degrees, Solomon's temple has been destroyed by Cyrus the Great and the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar. The Jews are in exile in Babylon, and they get sent back to rebuild the second temple, which is actually called the Temple of Zorobabel, which literally means the heart of Babylon. So yeah, you definitely see Egyptian, solar, astrological motifs. And of course, you'll see these fingerprints on Christianity, but they kind of predate it. Go back to Osiris, Egypt, Babylon. I think that's pretty irrefutable as well.
Now, why is it that, you ask most people and they think, well, we were founded on Christianity. Why is it that, we're not taught any of this in our school books? And why do you think most people think that, we're based solely on Christianity? And why is this a secret? Why is it hidden?
Right. Well, I don't have a problem. I mean, I think, when you're dealing with like a Christian tenet, you could say like faith, hope, charity, equality. I mean, I think, these are tenets, of Christianity. I mean, they are certainly part of it. But, I guess what's not taught is that Christianity borrows itself from a lot of mystery school teachings.
Right.
This is kind of like the hidden history.
Yeah.
What you can successfully argue, and I mean, I think this is pretty well true, is, when Christianity was, as we know, when Orthodox Christianity was invented, it was pretty much, I mean, it was the Council of Nicaea that codified what became modern day Christian Orthodoxy. I mean, now, of course, you have your splits here and there between the Western Church, the Eastern Church, different things like that. But it's really at the Council of Nicaea where you have the hallmarking of the celebrations of Christianity, Jesus, and what many Masons, believe it or not, have actually said is, that the pagans who created this religion were just relying on the old sun worship. They were just relying on the old mystery schools. I mean, it's because, like, for example, I mean, Christmas, the celebration of the birthday of Jesus, I mean, is a clear reference to the winter solstice, the birthday of the annual sun. The vernal equinox, the resurrection of the sun, is, of course, Passover or Easter, celebration of the spring, the end of winter. So they were just incorporating the old paganism into this new religion. That's not taught, and it is kind of kept secret. I believe personally, just from my experience with it, this is what you often hear that Masonry conceals its secrets, even to the Masons. They kind of put you on the path. It's up to you to decide, to discern this material. And I believe that this is one of the things the Masonic ritual is ultimately trying to encode, is this whole legend. What I call in my books is, and I can't think of any other way to describe it, is the born and resurrected solar God-man. Call this figure Hiram Abiff, Jesus, Osiris. It's pretty much the same thing. It all revolves around astrology, astronomy. And of course, I don't want to pivot too much. I mean, this character is all over the place in cinema. I mean, this is Harry Potter. This is Neo from The Matrix. This is Luke Skywalker, Aslan the lion, who is scorned and resurrected. I mean, Aslan, is a lion, Leo, who does battle with the Winter Queen. So you'll find this, astrotheological, almost Neoplatonic imagery in Masonry and in the architecture. And yeah, I mean, as far as the United States being a Christian nation, I mean, I call it a Masonic nation. I think that the lessons of the Masonic Lodge are much more impressed upon this nation than the tenets of Christianity. I mean, the founders did not want a Vatican-style organization. If they wanted that, they could have had it. I mean, and certainly they were completely open to the idea of religious freedom. Whatever your path to God was going to be left to you. That comes straight out of the constitutions of the Freemasons of 1721 by Dr. James Anderson. So that's what the founders were really striving for, was, a country with religious freedom for all. Right.
Now, it does still seem like it was kind of under the guise of Christianity. Why do you think that it was because they think people couldn't handle the truth, or they didn't deserve to know the truth? I'm still not quite understanding why it's, why most people aren't allowed this knowledge.
Well, I think a lot of people, I think you are allowed the knowledge. You can buy books on this that talk about this openly. I mean, you can buy books by Freemasons who talk about it. My book talks about it. Manly P. Hall talks about it. Albert Pike talks about it. Albert Mackey, he's a very famous 33rd degree Freemason. He talks about it. There's a Freemason who wrote a book called Stellar, I can't remember the name of it. It's like Stellar Masonic Astrology and Stellar Theology. So yeah, I mean, my experience with it is I have no problem talking about it. My own experience is people seem to be afraid of it. It's like they're almost afraid of it.
It just has a connotation of forbidden knowledge. I mean, never talked about in any schools, any colleges,
I agree with you. I mean, I think it should be taught. And I mean, I think there is a huge, I mean, I get into this in my book. Is one of the reasons I wrote it is there is a huge section of American history that is cut out of our history books, especially with American history, and it revolves around a man named DeWitt Clinton, who is one of the most important political figures in United States history. He was a Freemason. He is the guy who is carrying on the Masonic tradition after the death of Washington in 1799, and literally, Chris, using Masonry to form the nation around. He is erased from our history books. I mean, he is pretty much the reason why today we have the two-party political system is because of DeWitt Clinton. And he is literally written out of our history books. And I think it's very unfortunate. The information is out there. I mean, unfortunately, most people don't want to pursue it. Even Masons, I pursued it just because I was very interested in it. But when you get into this forbidden knowledge with the architecture, and especially when you get into these astrotheological doctrines with Christianity, Judaism, I mean, you have the founders of Christianity and even Jewish rabbis saying this, and they said it openly. They said, look, within Christianity, I mean, all these Abrahamic faiths have a mystery school. I mean, Kabbalah in Judaism, you have astrology or astrotheology in Christianity, and you have Sufism in Islam. And they all said, this is information that people can't handle, the profane masses, as what Albert Pike would use. And the knowledge has to be kept secret because people don't want to hear it. And when they do hear it, a lot of them can't handle it. I think it's fascinating. I talk about it. I have no problem coming on shows such as yours and talking about it. But I think there's just a lot of people that it can be upsetting to. I don't think it should be that way, but it is. I've encountered it myself.
Very good. Now, let's talk for a bit about your first book, The Royal Arch of Enoch. It must be a very pivotal sort of ritual in Freemasonry to write a book about it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, absolutely. You make a great point. I believe it is pretty much the premier ritual in all of Freemasonry. And the reason for that is you have to understand a little bit what's going on inside the Masonic ritual. I'm going to try to condense this as best I can because this is a very long story. In the Blue Lodge of Masonry, this is the first 3 degrees of entered apprentice, master, mason, fellowcraft. I just put it out of order though. In the 3rd degree, the architect of Solomon's temple is Hiram Abiff, and he possesses the secret word. It's the name of God, and it's what's generally called the Tetragrammaton. And he has it, and it's this word. It's through the correct pronunciation of this word that all wisdom and knowledge is made possible. And he has the word, and he keeps it to himself. And as he's finishing the temple, 3 fellowcraft want the word for themselves. And he says, well, I'll give it to you, but I'm not going to do it until after the temple's complete. That's not good enough, so they murder him. And the word is lost. And you will repeatedly hear this term, the lost word of a master mason. Fast forward to the high degree bodies in the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, the word is recovered. This name of God, the secret name of God is found. And it's found in the Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonials. It's the 13th degree in the Scottish Rite. It's the 7th in the York Rite. That is pretty much the end of the Masonic story. That is really the highest degree of Freemasonry. I know a lot of people out there will say about the 33rd degree, 32nd degree, and that's true. But philosophically and ritually speaking, the 13th degree is the highest degree of Freemasonry. That is the end of the story. The reason that ritual is so important is for several reasons, and I will again do my best to condense this. Number one is it's the recovery of founding what was lost. I mean, think of the Holy Grail story, or the Golden Fleece. You're finding what was lost in the Blue Lodge, the lost word of a master mason, the name of God. The degree ceremonial, part of the high degrees, was crafted on the continent of Europe, in Paris, France, in the 1730s, 1740s. And this is the main thesis of the book, is the ritual is incorporating components of the lost book of Enoch, 1 Enoch, Ethiopic Enoch, which was lost to history at the time. Ethiopian 1 Enoch was not returned to Europe until 1793 by a guy named James Bruce, and even then it wasn't even translated into English until 1823. But this high degree ceremonial back in the 1730s was incorporating elements of the Book of Enoch. So my book presents this historical anomaly that there must have been a copy of this book out there that these ritualists were using to craft this ritual around. Additionally, the symbolism and the philosophies coming out of this ritual are literally what was being used to found the United States around. It's this one particular high degree that so much of the symbolism, so much of the political theory, DeWitt Clinton, people like that were using to really craft the nation around. I can't stress that enough. And that is really the main thrust of the Royal Arch of Enoch book. It's nearly a 700-page book. It was first published in 2012. I republished it in 2016. And it was literally the result of 20 years of writing and research.
Now, you had said that was the highest degree. You don't think that there is some other hidden knowledge beyond the 32nd degree, like when you hit the 33rd degree?
Right. The 32nd degree, a lot of the degree work in the Scottish Rite and York Rite, actually, the degrees are numerically higher, but the degree, what's going on inside the degrees actually takes place prior to the events of the Royal Arch of Enoch. The events of the Royal Arch of Enoch is they're building the second temple, the Temple of Zorobabel, and they find a treasure vault. They find a trap door in the ground, and it springs, and inside is a subterranean treasure vault containing the name of God, which is the lost word of a master mason, and the two pillars of Enoch, which he has used to trick God by inscribing the wisdom that he gained from this group of fallen angels known as the Watchers in the Book of Enoch. He has inscribed on these two pillars the mathematical wisdom and the 7 liberal arts and sciences in order to trick God. When God tried to destroy this wisdom with the flood of Noah, Enoch decides to thwart the will of God and conceal this wisdom in this subterranean treasure vault. The 33rd degree is honorary. It's by invitation only. You cannot solicit it. And a lot of the degree structure and rituals, really, some of them take place before the Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial. So it really is the premier degree in all of Freemasonry. I can't stress that enough, and it's especially what's going on with the recovery of the name of God in the Tetragrammaton. And again, it's so much of the symbolism is coming out of this degree. And again, it's the 13th, and I mean, it's one of the reasons why the number 13 is all over the United States seal. It has to do with this degree. It's the name of God. It's the Kabbalistic Shekinah, the recovery of the divine presence that's going on inside this ritual. And again, why it's so critical is it's incorporating components of the Book of Enoch, which under a traditional historic standpoint should not be happening.
Right. Now, you mentioned the Book of Enoch. What are your thoughts on the theory that, the knowledge of Freemasonry is passed on from fallen angels from the Book of Enoch?
Right. Well, that's part of the controversy with it, and that's part of the anti-Masonry. Is in the Book of Enoch, the wisdom is considered divine. In the Old Testament, it's considered evil. And this is, if you read the Masonic monitors, they talk about this, that Enoch was going to preserve this, quasi, quote unquote, demonic knowledge for future generations. And that's exactly what happens. He puts in the Masonic liturgy, he puts the name of God on a golden delta and buries it in the subterranean treasure vault beneath 9 arches with the 2 pillars of Enoch next to it. And it's through the correct pronunciation of this word that the pillars can be restored. In the Masonic War, prior to the Masons getting there, the treasure vault is breached by 2 previous people or entities, or one's an entity at least. The first is the Greek mathematician Pythagoras, who has his eureka moment, right, in the Vault of Enoch. Says, I have found it, meaning the name of God, says it correctly and restores mathematics back to mankind. And the other character is Hermes Trismegistus, a god coming out of Hellenistic Egypt, who goes into the treasure vault, correctly pronounces the Tetragrammaton, and restores the 7 liberal arts and sciences back to mankind. So then you get to the Masonic ritual. The Mason discovers this subterranean treasure vault, and by beholding the Tetragrammaton becomes the symbolic Enoch, Pythagoras, Hermes Trismegistus, godlike figure. And the way it was crafted in the early days of the country was by doing this, this was by implication, gave you this, what I would call divine right to rule as a citizen king. And this is what DeWitt Clinton was modeling the nation around, especially coming out of New York State, was that if you had gone through this high degree, you were given the express warrant to rule over other people. So yeah, I mean, it's very fascinating to think that the Masons were preserving perhaps this lost wisdom. It's certainly part of the ritual. What you come to figure, or I guess that's probably not the right word, is kind of come to understand, at least in my opinion, in researching all of this, I believe that the ceremonial is actually trying to convey lost yet legitimate wisdom. I mean, if you are familiar with the ritual ceremonial, the working of the ritual as it is now, the vault is discovered by Jewish temple builders. When the ritual was originally crafted, it was discovered by Catholic Knights Templar. And it begs the question, naturally, is this ritual trying to convey to you or to the participant that this is some legitimate lost history, that the Templars really did uncover some subterranean treasure vault in the Holy Land, because that's where the ritual takes place, on the Temple Mount. So that'd be fascinating to think that the Templars may have actually discovered something. Is this ritual trying to convey it? But yeah, absolutely. I mean, you definitely have Masonry, the rituals, trying to be the preservers of this lost symbolic knowledge, astrotheology, astrology, the Book of Enoch. Yeah, I really don't dispute that. It's one of the, when I joined it, I mean, it's a fraternal order. I joined it not knowing all this. But when I got involved with it, and you begin reading the books like the Manly P. Halls, like the Albert Mackeys, like the Albert Pikes, you'll start to uncover that these rituals are really trying to encode these deeper, dark secrets, esoteric secrets. And I believe that to be the case.
Very good. Now let's shift into some cinema symbolism. Now, movies have had a huge impact on society since they first started coming out with movies. Would you say that they're using literal magic in these movies?
Yeah, I think that is a good way of putting it. I mean, I think that movies are a very powerful form of media. I think it's possibly, arguably, one of the most powerful forms of media ever created. So yeah, I mean, it is akin to magic and sorcery. If you want to look at it, if you just want to strip it down for a minute, I mean, you're going into a darkened theater with pews to receive light, to watch a movie. It's almost akin to going to church, if you think about it, where you're going to church to sit in a pew, to listen to gospel tales and the preacher preach. You're going to a movie to watch perhaps a morality lesson, drama, a horror film, perhaps a life-changing experience. Many movies are very impactful upon society and upon the viewer. So yes, I do believe that these movie makers use these mythologies, mystical doctrines as a form of magic to invest their movies with a sense of mysticism in some cases. And I say in my books, it's akin to mythology making. That these movie makers are using these symbols and these ancient religions and these ancient doctrines and mysticism and the occult to imbue their films with more than just a story about, some space opera and, with Star Wars. I mean, it's really more modern day mythology. It's a real deep study in comparative religion. But yeah, I definitely have no problem saying it's a form of magic or something like that. I have no problem saying that.
Now, how far does this go back? And, when did they figure that they could use these symbols to enhance, the movie experience?
Well, right. I mean, it's a very good question. I believe that this predate. I mean, I think it's in movies from day one. I mean, you will find in pre-movies, you will find an obsession with William Shakespeare, with the occult, with witches, with ghosts, with magic, with fairies and goblins. We turn to the works of Mozart, the Magic Flute, which has mythological, Illuminati, Masonic elements embedded in it. The works of the Ring Cycle by Richard Wagner is, of course, the Odinic mysteries, of the Odinic mystery school. We have in Hollywood, we have very early movies dealing with Fritz Lang, for instance, Metropolis, which is very Gnostic, a very Gnostic movie. We have, again, another early movie was the Nosferatu movie, which was based on Stoker's Dracula. which is very mystical. That embeds the Dracula story by Stoker is covered with esoteric symbolism. The deeper meaning of that story is about Eastern mysticism, mainly Blavatsky's theosophy movement invading and intruding upon Victorian Christianity. That's really the subtext of Dracula. I mean, Frankenstein, again, an early Universal horror movie. Frankenstein's monster is a Kabbalistic golem. So yeah, I mean, from the very early days, I mean, The Wizard of Oz, L. Frank Baum, the Baum story. Baum was in Blavatsky's theosophy movement, so we have a very deep symbolic trove of initiation into the mysteries, the obtaining and finding of gnosis in The Wizard of Oz. You have the wizard, Oz, the great and powerful, as the demiurge, the Gnostic demiurge. So yeah, I mean, you know, even in the early days of Hollywood, this is not a modern invention. From the early days of Hollywood, you will find these mystical elements going on inside of movies, no doubt about it.
Now, what would you say of elements that some movies are like a form of mind control, or maybe even a way to steer humanity in a certain direction?
Yeah, I would be a little skeptical of the term mind control. I think they can. I think they're really using this symbolism to. I mean, mind control. I think of something like the Manchurian Candidate, where you flash the Queen of Hearts or the Queen of Diamonds, and the person goes out and shoots somebody. I don't think movies really are designed to do something like that. They can be influential. I would be hesitant to use the term mind control. But there is no question of their importance and how influential they are in modern society. I think that's pretty irrefutable, but I kind of would shy away from the term mind control. I mean, I've never watched a movie, where I found the hidden symbolism and thought this was being done to mind control. I thought it was trying to convey esoteric imagery and convey some esoteric meaning, but I wouldn't necessarily call it mind control.
So what about, a way to kind of steer interest in a certain direction, maybe certain ideas, political stuff like that?
Yeah. I mean, again, I wouldn't necessarily call that necessarily mind control. I mean, certainly you have, like I said, when you say mind control to me, I think of, the Manchurian Candidate. If you walk out of a movie theater and mass shoot somebody, mass shoot a Burger King, and he did it because of the movie, then we could start talking mind control. But I mean, I think that, I do believe in, globalist elites who are trying to social, maybe engineer society. But I mean, like when I analyze a movie and I find out chemical themes or repetition or something like that, I've never thought it was done for mind control purposes. I think the closest you could probably come to that is saying maybe to the effect of they're playing with the subconscious mind. I'll say that a lot of the imagery in films are archetypal, and they're aware of this, and they're using archetypes to influence or to impress your subconscious mind, and it's because almost the archetypes are a form, we're drawn to them. The archetypes are, come out of the subconscious mind. Thus, they're subconscious. This we don't know about them, but they're there, and movies can really play upon the subconscious mind through archetypal imagery. That I definitely believe in, but I wouldn't say that's really akin to mind control. But they do. I don't dispute that they do that, though.
So what about introducing new technologies in a subtle way? Have you ever seen anything like that?
Sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are instances where, like, for an example, like a movie like Yankee Doodle Dandy, I mean, is clearly propaganda, war propaganda. Yeah, the introduction of they did in one of the Transformer movies, I think it was the second one with the railgun, where in the movie they used the railgun to shoot the Transformer. I think they were fighting on the Pyramid of Giza of all things, and they used the railgun to shoot it off, and it actually invented it, and the Navy actually came forward and said, we were using the movie to introduce the railgun to the world. So yeah, they definitely, things like that do occur. I know when the X-Files was on TV, the FBI repeatedly reviewed the scripts for accuracy, things like that. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely can be a government involvement with it. And yeah, I mean, absolutely, they can use it to, like I said, to introduce something. There is, I mean, and I do believe it's an interesting phenomena, and I do talk about it, is the whole idea of movies being predictive mechanisms.
That's what I was just about to ask you about.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was about to ask you, what about predictive programming and shows like The Simpsons that like seem to have predicted the future, you know?
Right, absolutely. There is something to this. I don't know if movie makers have a crystal ball or are given information. I find that hard to believe. But it is without question that there are, especially when you get near the events, there are elements of, there are things that have come to pass. The movies have been prophetic. That's irrefutable. I proposed a hypothesis that it has to do with the collective unconscious, what Plato called the theory of forms, and that is that if these archetypal imageries are inherited, can somehow, by making a piece of artwork, i.e., a movie, can you subconsciously be encoding it future events and not even being aware you're doing it? Because there is a very eerie synchronicity to a lot of this. I mean, for instance, the Simpsons episode you're talking about, where the 9/11 appeared, I believe the episode is called Homer Simpson versus New York City, and this is, of course, where Bart waves the money in front of the.
Well, I was actually thinking about the one with Donald Trump, but that one too, yeah.
Right. Well, that the episode where Bart waves the money in front of the magazine, where it's 9 and then 11, and then the 11 is formed by the World Trade Center. I mean, there's some very interesting things about that, because where it gets really creepy is that episode was released on September 21st, 1997, almost 4 years to the day before 9/11. Then 2 years later, on September 21st, 1999, you had one of the great predictor movies of 9/11 being released, which was Fight Club. I mean, where you have, Tyler Durden there at the end talking about we're at ground zero, the destruction of the financial buildings. I mean, even Operation Latte Thunder, where they take out the piece of artwork, the corporate artwork. That's obviously supposed to be the sphere in between, the plaza of the World Trade Center, which they destroy. So we have we have Fight Club being released on the same day 2 years later of the Simpsons episode. And then 2 years after that, you have almost to the day 9/11. So there is this very creepy, almost impossible to explain timeline synchronicity going on here. And it's happening. I mean, there it is. I can't explain it. I don't know why it is, but I can't write it off. It's not a coincidence. I'm actually writing on my third cinema book right now. And there's some really crazy ones regarding President Trump. I don't know how aware you are of these.
Oh, no. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, well, there was there's some really crazy ones with President Trump. There's three really strange ones. The first one goes back to the 1950s, where it's a TV Western television show called what's it called? I forget the name of it. I'd have to go look it up for you. But there's a Western TV show. It didn't last long. It was only from like 57 to 59. And there's an episode where a character named Trump comes along, and he's a prophet prophesizing the end of the world. And he basically says the only way to save yourself is you got to build walls. I'm here to build a wall, and you've got to build a wall in order to save yourself. And this is in the late 50s. Then you fast forward to, I believe it was 1990. You had the sequel to the Gremlins movie come out, which was Gremlins 2, The New Batch. In that movie, you had a Trump analog played by John Glover named Daniel Clamp, and he hangs out in the Clamp Tower. And there's a scene in it where Clamp is coming out onto the street, and it's clearly supposed to be Donald Trump. And the news reporters, they want to talk to him and say, hey, let's go talk to Clamp, see what's going on. The Gremlins are destroying his building. And he stands there talking, and the two news reporters put the microphones to his face. And the numbers on the microphones are 11 and 9, November 9th, which was when Trump won the presidency. Then you have in 2010 this same imagery going on, where Trump actually made a television commercial for Serta mattresses. And in it, he's talking up to one of the counting sheep. He's saying he's trying to hawk Serta mattresses, and the sheep saying, oh, you're going to put me out of work. Everyone's going to fall asleep immediately. And they walk down a hallway, and the sheep have numbers on them. They're standing outside of rooms, and the two sheep that are shown, again, are 11 and 9, November 9th. Yeah, the date that he won the presidency. I mean, that's just really too bizarre that you can write off as coincidence. But I'll be the first to admit, Chris, I can't explain it. And I wish to God I could remember the name of that television show. I just put it on my Facebook channel, on my Facebook page, the thing with the Trump Western. If you go to YouTube, type in Trump build wall Western, and it'll come up. I just can't remember the name of it right now.
What are your thoughts on the possibilities of CERN maybe messing with our reality?
Yeah, I think that's very possible. And this gets me to a subject that I've just begun talking about, which is the Mandela Effect. And when I first heard about this, I was skeptical of it. And I think most people are. And it's right to be skeptical about it. I was like, oh, come on, maybe this is just a bad memory or something. But what's really strange about this is people remember it differently, and they swear to it. Yeah, I mean, they're definitely, I mean, I think even scientists admitted that in 2011, maybe 2010 or 9, our reality may have merged with 3 others. Right. And this was a science like quantum mechanics put this out. And then, of course, CERN with the Hadron Collider. Yeah, who knows what kind of havoc that's wreaking. I was skeptical of this, but I've experienced it myself. And the main one I know that I saw and I remembered was the Sally Field Oscar speech, where in 1985, she won an Oscar for Places in the Heart, and she delivered one of the most famous. She was giving her speech, and she said, "You like me, you really like me," which has been copied all over the place. And one of the main movies that this was parodied in was a movie that came out in 1994 called The Mask with Jim Carrey. And there's a scene in it where Carrey is doing this, and all of a sudden the statue pops up, and he gets handed a statue, and he takes it, and he says, "Thank you." And this audience comes up, make-believe audience that's supposed to be watching. He says, "Oh, thank you. You like me. You really like me." And he's obviously impersonating Sally Field.
Right.
What comes out now in my reality, this line was never said. This has somehow been changed. Now Sally Field says, "You like me, you really like," she says, "You like me, right now you like me." That's never the way it was. That's never, ever, ever the way it was. I went back and watched the Jim Carrey movie. That's changed now. The Mask, he no longer says, "You like me," he says, "You love me." He says, "You love me." That was never the same. I saw that movie in the theater, and I remember the line was he was impersonating Sally Fields. And in my eyes, this kind of proves that something is happening, because what movie then, or what speech, better said, is Jim Carrey impersonating? What Oscar winner is he impersonating? And the answer is no one. So that scene in The Mask now makes no sense whatsoever. And I know I saw Sally Field deliver that Oscar speech. I remember it. I remember when it happened. It was 1985. I remember watching it, and they're showing the rerun of it, and they're showing holding the Oscar, and you're saying, "You like me, you really like me," and everyone's clapping. Apparently that's changed now. And we have the Mandela effect. This is what Doc Brown in Back to the Future called the ripple effect, that if you change the one, now we've changed the Jim Carrey one where he says, "You love me," which makes no sense whatsoever. So I don't know what's going on. The one thing I can tell you that is strange in all this is that Sally Field's brother works at CERN, for whatever that's worth. Yeah. So
interesting.
Yeah, and like I said, another one for me was the cereal brand. And I people have said to me, "Well, is this time traveling or what's going on?" I think it has to do with a parallel dimension or parallel dimensions in interfacing. That's to me what it is. I think time travel may be real, but I think maybe we can all agree if people are going back in time, they may not be changing cereal boxes. Maybe it's a side effect or something. I grew up eating Captain Crunch, and it was never Cap'n Crunch as it is now. CAP-N. It was always Captain Crunch. I mean, I ate this cereal every other day when I was a kid. It was Captain Crunch. I walked by it in the supermarket. I pulled it off the shelf. It was Captain Crunch. Now it's Cap'n Crunch. No, this has changed somehow. So, to me, this is to do with bleeding realities coming through, or an interfacing with a different timeline or reality. I can't explain it, but I definitely believe it's happening.
Well, CERN itself has some pretty heavy imagery, even outside the building with the statue of Shiva, the destroyer outside,
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually heard that they're actually trying to open portals in that place to speak to the demons from the Book of Enoch to gain wisdom. That they're actually trying to open. This is akin. What they're trying to do is doing what John Dee tried to do or did. Dr. John Dee, the Renaissance Kabbalist and astrologer and court magician to Queen Elizabeth, he was summoning these demons and angels to gain knowledge. And I've even heard from mainstream sources that this hadron, this collider, is being used to open realities or open portals to another dimension to speak to these Enochian watchers, these demons. And if that's the case, I mean, who knows what the hell kind of side effects are happening? I know Sally Field said that line, and I know along the way reality has changed. And I damn well know that Captain Crunch was once spelled Captain Normal, not Captain. So I can testify something strange is going on.
Yeah, I would agree. Something strange is definitely going on. Now, to get back to the topic of movies, what is the latest movie you've kind of dissected and taken a look at?
Oh boy, yeah, that's a good one. Good question. I'm actually writing Cinema Symbolism 3 right now, and I have like a want list of movies that I want. I'm going to watch. I've seen ads for them. I know there's going to be symbolism. I even read a little bit about it online. I guess one of the ones that I'm really going after is not the latest Star Wars movie. I haven't seen Last Jedi yet, but The Force Awakens has a lot of esoteric imagery in it. That's a very agnostic film, a lot of elements of Gnosticism in that. That's one I'm taking on. That's a recent movie. I have yet to see it, but I know it has some alchemical themes in it, just from what I've seen of the previews, and the little bit I've seen is The Shape of Water, Guillermo del Toro. I saw in Cinema Symbolism 2, I analyzed Crimson Peak, which is overloaded with esoteric imagery. That one just goes off the charts for hidden imagery. So I'm going to take a look at The Shape of Water. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm most eager to see that one. The latest Star Wars movie is one I'm taking on. I'm going to do I took on in Cinema Symbolism 2 some of the David Lynch material, so I'm going to return to that. So yeah, the Bates Motel television show, Hitchcock, incorporated loads of esoteric imagery in a lot of his films, and they carried this forward with a TV show that aired called The Bates Motel. A lot going on inside that. So yeah, that's just some of the stuff I'm looking at for Cinema Symbolism 3. I'm working on that actually as we speak. That's something I'm writing right now.
Now, superheroes is really big right now. Have you kind of dissected any of the new superhero movies out lately?
Yeah, no, these are ones that I've been meaning to watch. I've always been, when I was growing up as a kid, I was a big fan of the DC material, much more than the Marvel stuff. Yeah, I mean, when you're dealing with with a lot of superhero material, I mean, absolutely, you're dealing with loads of archetypal imagery, loads of ancient mythology with superheroes, things relating to psychology, the shadow self, yeah, absolutely. Superhero movies was something that I took on in the first movie book. I took on a little of the Batman mythology. But yeah, the idea of the higher self, the higher consciousness, I took on in Cinema Symbolism 2, I took on Watchmen, which was Alan Moore, which is loaded with all kind of esoteric imagery. I call that one a conspiracy smorgasbord. I mean, that one just has all sorts of hidden little.
Yeah, that was a very interesting movie. Let's talk about that one for a second.
Yeah, I mean that one right there. I mean, the Watchmen movie. I mean, that has things related to the apotheosis of mankind, with Dr. Manhattan receiving superpowers. I mean, really like a Christ-like solar imagery. I like the symbol that he chooses for himself, which is a Masonic symbol, which is the point within the circle that comes straight out of Freemasonry, and again is denoting the solar resurrected God-man, which is of course what Dr. Manhattan is. When he first appears, he appears cruciform in front of the sun. If that wants to tell you anything. And then I like the whole thing with Ozymandias. You have this whole idea of this Masonic sort of, Egyptian conspiracy going on behind the scenes. You have, Egyptian symbolism in the Blue Lodge. The high degrees are crafted by the Jesuits in the 1730s, 1740s in Paris, France. When they're going through Moloch's mail, There's two pieces of mail in there that are interesting, involving conspiracy. One is from Ozymandias' Egyptian corporation, or the Pyramidal Corporation, and the piece of mail right behind it is from the Jesuits. I thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah, just a great movie. I really liked it, and lots of esoteric imagery going on when you take a look at Watchmen.
Now, what about, of course, we have to talk about The Matrix, the one of the ultimate red pill movies. What have you seen in that?
Oh my goodness gracious! Yeah, I mean that to me is that is a movie that is overloaded with esoteric imagery. If you are interested in an ancient theology and an ancient religion, or it's probably not a religion, that's not the right word. That really is Gnosticism 101 film. If you want to watch a Gnosticism proper movie, check out the first Matrix movie, because from a Gnostic standpoint, that has everything you want in it. And that really is what I would describe as your Manichaean Valentinian strain of Gnosticism. If the viewer is not familiar, Valentinus was a Gnostic philosopher who said that this reality is an illusion, that you escape it by seeking spiritual gnosis, and in the Valentinian system, the person who is sort of the illuminator, the person who wakes you up, is Jesus Christ. I mean, you just look at the Matrix movie. I mean, you have everything right there. I mean, you have the illusionary world of the Matrix. It's all make-believe. You have the real world of spiritual gnosis. And of course, this echoes the teachings of Valentinus that says you're part of the world. You're in the world, but not part of it. And of course, this is what Neo feels. He's in the world. He's not part of it. So he takes the red pill and escapes and goes into the real world. And of course, we later find out that the illusionary world is created by the architect. Of course, in Gnosticism, this would be the demiurge, and the creator of the material false reality. And in Gnosticism teachings, the demiurge is assisted by a bunch of, I guess, angels and demons that are called archons, which sole purpose is to keep mankind suppressed. And of course, these are the agents in the movie. And then you have, Neo as the Christ savior figure. What is it, where he's even called Jesus Christ by the guy who knocks on the door at the beginning. He says, "You're my own personal Jesus Christ." Neo lives in room 101. That is computer binary for the number 5, I believe. And since computers count 0, that is the 6th. That is number 6. And of course, Neo is the 6th iteration of the 1. And then when Neo, when he wakes up to the real world, he's listed cruciform into the light. When he goes onto the bridge of the Nebuchadnezzar, the nameplate, I believe, says like Luke 3:11, which is again a Christ reference to Neo, saying, all dark entities will bow down before me. And then, of course, Neo goes on to, try to become the Christ Savior. He's going to awaken mankind from their stasis. And then, at the very end of the movie, flies off into the heavens at the end, echoing Jesus. So yeah, if you're looking to see Valentinian cosmology on film, the best place to look is the first Matrix movie. That really, and it has the Manichaean element of light versus dark, good versus evil, where the machines are dark, and the crew of the Nebuchadnezzar are forces for good, forces for light, forces for enlightenment. You definitely have an analog with the Morpheus figure, who would be sort of, I would say, would be the equivalent of the Hermes Trismegistus magician character who prophesies the coming of Jesus. Morpheus is prophesizing the coming of the One. Another element of Gnosticism that's very important is dualism, the union of opposites. The name Morpheus, in mythology, is the god of dreams, yet in the Matrix, he's the guy who's going to bring you out of your dream state, bring you to the reality, bring you to the truthful consciousness. So again, just to wrap up, from a Gnostic, Valentinian, Manichaean standpoint, the Matrix is very overloaded, very overwrought with esoteric and occult themes and symbolism.
Very good. Now, we have a few minutes left. There's so much more we could talk about, but I'd like to kind of end on the symbolism of Disney and Disney World. There's some fascinating, occult symbolism going on there.
Right. Well, Disney does get a bit of a bad rap. A lot of his movies are overloaded with archetypal esoteric imagery. I should point out that Disney was not a Freemason. This is a misconception. He was in a group called Demolay. That's absolutely true, which was sort of the best way for me to describe it is the Masonic Boy Scouts. And this had a very deep influence upon him. In fact, there's actually a drawing out there, I have it in my book, of a drawing Walt Disney did for Dad Land. That was the guy who ran it at the time, of Mickey Mouse in the Demolay regalia. Disney, when you're getting into the fairy tale movies, things like that, you're dealing with a lot of archetypal imagery. That's what the fairy tales are. Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, movies such as that, Snow White. You're dealing with a lot of counter-Reformation themes. But, Disney movies do tread on the occult and mysticism. I mean, you had that really dark phase of Disney where they were trying to get away from the child's movies and appeal to adolescents. It didn't go over so well. But, you have the Witch Mountain movies, which I take on. Those are really overloaded with a lot of occult themes, witchcraft, UFOs. I talk about it in the books. We won't have time to get into it. But then you get into the Renaissance with Disney, with The Lion King, for example. Again, a retelling of the solar Egyptian lore, Osiris being, Mustafa, and Horus being Simba. The Set Typhon character being Scar. The death of Osiris, the Horus stand-in, their solar avatars. I like it in that movie where they're looking out and it's the elephant graveyard. And if you're familiar with solar iconography and the movements, the solar ecliptic, the sun rises in the east, is at the south at midday, sets in the west. The one place you'll never find the sun is the north. The north is where the sun can't go. And you'll even hear them talk about this in The Lion King. They said, oh, what's that over there? They said, that's the place of darkness. That's the elephant cemetery. That's in the north. We can't go over there. Just stay away from it. So the retelling of the Egyptian Osirian mythology in The Lion King. But Disney put out National Treasure, which is the retelling of the Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial. The first National Treasure movie is a Masonic ritual put on the big screen. The Masonic ritual is the recovery of the Masonic Templar treasure in a subterranean treasure vault beneath the Holy Ground. Well, what's National Treasure? The recovery of the Masonic Templar treasure beneath the Holy Ground. They said it in New York, which is a direct homage to this person I mentioned earlier named DeWitt Clinton. So a lot going on with Disney. I have a whole chapter on Disney and symbolism too. So if you're interested in Walt Disney, by all means, check out CS2.
Now, what about Disney World and its architecture? I know there's something interesting about Epcot Center.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's Epcot Center? We won't have time to get into it. It's a deep, long story. But it is. I get into it in Cinema Symbolism too. To make a long story incredibly short, Epcot Center was designed by a guy named Buckminster Fuller, and Buckminster Fuller has a lot in common, believe it or not, with Dr. John Dee of all things. Buckminster Fuller was a mathematician. He's often called the Benjamin Franklin of the rocket age, and he was heavy into mathematics. And believe it or not, his formula comes up with the same thing that John Dee came up with 500 years later. It has to do with the way the universe was created by God. It has to do with alchemy, the perfection of numbers. And Buckminster Fuller designed Epcot Center, which is fascinating because it does tie into John Dee, because Fuller and Dee almost walk parallel in their mathematical theories.
Very interesting. Like I said, there's so much more we could talk about. I'm definitely going to have you back on. I want to thank you again for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you, Chris, for having me on Forbidden News Knowledge. It was a pleasure to be here. I know this interview was a couple months in the making. I appreciate your patience in working with me. But yeah, absolutely. It was wonderful to be here with you tonight. And anytime you want to have me back on, we can continue the conversation with Masonry and Cinema Symbolism, anything you want to talk about.
Awesome. Very good. Well, you have an excellent night, Robert.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.